Metroid. It's one of the most pristine and respected series in all of video game history, at least until they started slapping the title on bullshit blast ball games, but we're just gonna pretend like that never happened. I think part of the reason Metroid is such a solid series with such a good reputation is that they don't just put out a new game every year like a lot of other franchises. Every game tries something new and it does something different. It doesn't always work, but hey, nobody's perfect. That's right, over the last 3 decades, there have only been 10 actual Metroid titles, most of which are amazing games on their own right. So before Federation Force comes out and disgraces the series' reputation worse than Other M ever could, let's count down the top 10 Metroid games of all time. Number 10! Coming in last place, we have Metroid Prime Hunters. Never have I been so underwhelmed while playing a Metroid game. So underwhelmed as a matter of fact that I didn't even beat it. I honestly barely got anywhere in Prime Hunters because there were a lot of things working against it. Prime Hunters came out in the part of the DS era when Nintendo was obsessed with forcing their gimmick on people without realizing their gimmick wasn't why people liked their games. The gimmick in this case? The stylus. It really made no sense to change up a control scheme that worked perfectly on the GameCube in Metroid Prime, but you have to move with the stylus and shoot with L and double tap the screen to jump and blech. It was a mess. The graphics were pretty shitty too. It made me realize just how bad a 3D Metroid game would have looked on the N64, and made me thankful that that was never attempted. I heard the multiplayer was good in Prime Hunters, but I played the game long after it came out, and by then there was really no one to try it out with, not that I could imagine actually trying to fight somebody with those horrific controls in the first place. I wish I had some good things to say about this game. I must have picked it up and put it down 3 different times before finally deciding it wasn't for me. I'm sure there were some redeeming qualities, but I just couldn't get through this game. Anyway, something had to come in last, right? Number 9. Oh, Other M. I'm sure many of you watching this video would have put Other M in last place without ever thinking twice about it, and hey, you wouldn't be wrong. But the truth of the matter is that I played and beat Other M, and I actually enjoyed it. How I got my copy of Metroid Other M is kind of a funny story in and of itself. I was in GameStop one day like a good little sheep, and this was a while back before I embarked on my quest to play every single Metroid game. The game had been out for a while and I'd heard all kinds of terrible, horrible things about it, and I happened to see it sitting on the shelf, used, for $3.99, and I felt like a mother who had just laid eyes on a sad, abandoned baby, and I said, "You might be bad, my poor little rejected angel, but you can't be $3.99 bad." And I took it home and played it, and damn it, it was a lot better than I expected. That being said, it has issues. The main one being that Samus starts the game with all her special weapons and upgrades, but won't use them until her former commanding officer says she's allowed to. It's the most un-Metroid, un-Samus thing you could possibly imagine. They threw together some weak-ass backstory where she has some weird daddy issues with the guy, and it's just completely out of character with how Samus is normally portrayed. I mean, she literally runs through an active volcano and is burning alive, but won't activate the Varia suit because Adam didn't say she could yet. It's fucked up, and it definitely took away from the Metroid experience, but hey, the game looked very good, and the combat and control scheme were a lot of fun. It was the first Metroid game since Zero Mission where Samus could achieve an incredible level of mobility, something the Prime series sort of lacked. I honestly would love another Metroid game on that same engine, just one where Samus doesn't get PTSD from seeing a villain she's already killed like 6 times already. Number 8. The original Metroid game for NES comes in surprisingly low on this list, but it just goes to show you how much the game has improved upon its original formula over the years. Metroid 1 is the only other game on this list that I haven't beaten all the way through, and I honestly think that's a big indicator of how fun I actually think a game is. It's not that I think it's a bad game, it just doesn't hold up well to today's standards, and I get that most NES games don't, but there are some that do, like Mega Man for example, that show us how unforgiving this game is. There's no map, most of the environments look extremely similar if not identical, your shots barely go anywhere at first, the enemies deal stupid amounts of damage, and if you die, you come back with just 30 health. Out of 100. Even if you have all the energy tanks, you still come back with 30 health. So yeah, it's tough. But the Metroid elements are all there. It's as atmospheric as an NES game could be back then. It feels very isolating, exploration is super important, and acquiring upgrades to progress to new areas is very much a thing. It's a Metroid game through and through, it's just not the best one. Number 7! We've reached a point, ladies and gentlemen, where every single game from this point forward is 100% pure concentrated Metroid gold. And to kick it off, I present you with Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. It's hard to talk about this game without continuously comparing it to the first Metroid Prime, and that's probably because of how insanely well-received Metroid Prime was, and they wanted to do it again, just different. The problem was, I think the differences kinda hurt it. It's kinda hard to ride the coattails of a flat-out masterpiece like Metroid Prime and come out on top. Not that Prime 2 wasn't fantastic, fantastic, it just wasn't as fantastic. The whole concept of Metroid Prime 2 revolved around this theme of light and dark that was sort of interesting, but they really went overboard with it. There was a dark world, you know, like in that other Nintendo game. What was it called? Oh yeah, Zelda. But it actually functioned more like the Spirit Realm from Soul Reaver, where it was a dark, twisted copy of the real world and you had to travel back and forth between the two to progress. While this was a really cool mechanic, it was incredibly frustrating at times, especially in the beginning, when being in the dark world literally killed you in 30 seconds. There are 3 beam upgrades in the game: the light beam, the dark beam, and a beam that just combined the 2 of them, and while those sound pretty cool, they required ammo. Beams had ammo in Metroid. And then if you wanted to refill the light beam, you had to kill things with the dark beam, and it was frustrating because if you're running out of light beam, it's because you're fighting things that you need to use the light beam against, so using the dark beam would barely be effective. And this was the game where Dark Samus was first introduced, and I was like, hold up, didn't we do this already a few years ago in Metroid Fusion? And I also think the whole light and dark concept is sort of an overdone, cheesy fantasy concept that didn't really fit well with Metroid's sci-fi setting. Anyway, those are just my gripes with it. It's really a great game, simply because it's Metroid Prime, so just wait for that part of the video and you'll see what I'm talking about. Number 6. Metroid 2: The Return of Samus. I honestly can't believe for how much I absolutely love this game that it's in the bottom 5, but I did my best to remove my nostalgia glasses when I made this list, so here we are. For being only the second game in the series, Metroid 2 is leaps and bounds ahead of its predecessor. Here we have an 8-bit game on a tiny handheld screen, not even in color, and somehow it manages to be about 10 times more atmospheric and suspenseful than the first game was, despite it being in full color and on the big screen. It just goes to show you that graphics aren't everything. It's how developers use the tools they're given that really makes a game shine. They pulled it off so well in Metroid 2 that even after the numerous times I've played it, it's hard for me to put my finger on just what makes Metroid 2 so brilliant. The overworld music on SR388 is one of the most compelling video game tracks I can think of, and it just makes me want to explore the fuck out of some stuff. The music in Metroid games has always been a big part of creating the right atmosphere, and that's as true as ever in Metroid 2. There's plenty of creepy music when you're exploring deep, dark caves, and the music that plays when you encounter a wild Metroid is sudden and jarring and can downright scare the piss right out of your bladder if you're not expecting it. The way you slowly run out of missiles and energy while you work your way towards your next target reminds me of an early predecessor to the survival horror genre. As a matter of fact, this game could be remade for a modern console as a survival horror game, but until then, I urge you to check out the fan remake of this game called AM2R. A true hero by the name of Dr. M64 has been working on it for the better part of the last decade, and I've gotta say, it's hella impressive. Link down in the description if you want to check it out. Number 5! Damn it, Metroid Prime 3, why are you so beautiful? This might be higher on the list than a lot of people would put Prime 3, but I really love that game. Strangely enough, one of my absolute favorite things about it is the title screen. Something about it is so chilling. The music is just beyond epic and it feels very final. I just sat there staring at it for the first time and I knew this was where it was all gonna go down. That aside, it's an amazing game. It was the first Metroid game on Wii and it used the motion controls, which seems very risky, but I wouldn't have had it any other way. It actually made for some really interactive and fun gameplay. You could use the nunchuck to sling out a grappling beam and rip enemies' shields away from them, and there were all kinds of levers and buttons to interact with where you actually needed to move the Wiimote the way Samus would need to move her hand. I don't know if that kind of thing is for everyone, but I thought it was a nice touch. In the beginning of the game, there's an epic fight with Ridley where you're both careening thousands of feet through the air while trying to rip each other apart, and it feels so good. Like it's so clear that these two are arch nemeses and have been in this same situation a dozen times and want nothing more than to just destroy each other. As you progress through the game, the Phazon-infused suit Samus wears corrupts her more and more, and you can even see the reflection of her distorted face in your own visor sometimes. It had some very epic boss battles, and having a Metroid game where you could actually travel from planet to planet in your ship was awesome. The only drawback to that was each planet felt kind of small since they had so many in one game, so it kind of lost that labyrinth feel that most Metroid games have. With all that said, my favorite thing about Metroid Prime 3 was the GFS Valhalla, a wrecked Galactic Federation ship that opens up for exploration about halfway through the game, but can't actually be completed until near the end. I don't want to spoil it too much, but it's one of those classic Metroid situations where you're exploring the aftermath of some serious shit having gone down. It was downright spooky, and it was one of the most Metroid-y moments I had ever experienced. Metroid Prime 3 is great, so if you haven't played it, just do it! Number 4! It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say Metroid Fusion blew my fucking tits off. It would be a metaphor though, because the game caused me no bodily harm and I don't even have tits. But figuratively, it totally did. Fusion came out at the same time as the first Prime game in 2002, and unlike with Prime, I was not late to this party. To be exact, I was 15 when I played Metroid Fusion. I'm old, you do the math. This was the first Metroid game in 8 years. The first one since Super Metroid in 1994, a game that I was completely obsessed with as a child. So needless to say, happiness. The premise was basically that you discover these parasites that could mimic any life forms they come into contact with, and they just so happen to come into contact with you. They infect Samus and her power suit has to be surgically removed and the pieces are put into quarantine. Samus almost dies, but Federation scientists save her by injecting her with Metroid DNA, because as it turns out, Metroids were the natural predators of these parasites. Anyway, this new suit forms around Samus called the Fusion suit, and she's just gotta survive trapped on this space station where all these crazy parasites are running around mutating everything. But the kicker, and the entire reason the game is amazing, is that the parasite-infected pieces of Samus's suit come to life and start hunting her down. And this is Samus's suit at full power. The game is full of these intense sequences where the SAX, that's what the evil parasite suit is called, bursts into the room and you have no choice but to run and hide. The entire game is just Samus trying to acquire enough power-ups to finally confront this thing, and it's just such a fucking cool concept. It's definitely one of the most suspenseful Metroid games, and it's just a 16-bit Game Boy Advance game, so it really just goes to show you how good a job the Metroid developers can do time and time again. Number 3! Metroid Zero Mission was one of the best ideas in the history of video games. The first Metroid game really wasn't all that amazing and was pretty much a chore to get through. Not to mention it wasn't very accessible to the younger generation of gamers either. So what ridiculously brilliant idea did Nintendo have? How about a remake? That's right, Metroid Zero Mission is a Game Boy Advance remake of the first Metroid game, and it is so well done that it makes my head spin. I actually had a hard time deciding between Fusion and Zero Mission for the number 3 slot, but I think Zero Mission blew my mind just a little harder, mainly because of the stuff that happens after you beat Mother Brain. And that's all I'm gonna say about that, because if you haven't played Zero Mission, you don't want this part spoiled for you. Aside from that, it's just really cool to get to play through Samus's very first mission with shiny 16-bit graphics in a game that's actually got a reasonable difficulty curve and, you know, a map. It's not just a straight remake either. Obviously, I mentioned there's some extra stuff at the end, but they added a lot of awesome power-ups from later Metroid games, and even some unknown items that become compatible with your suit later because reasons. I will say that the zone Wrecked Ship from Super Metroid gets an explanation, which is pretty awesome. Just play it. Trust me on this one. Number 2! Metroid Prime is just fuckloads of awesome piled on top of shit tons of amazing. Sorry if the suspense of this list is now out the window because you can totally figure out what number 1 is going to be by process of elimination, but whatever! As I mentioned before, Metroid Prime came out at the exact same time as Metroid Fusion, which was 8 entire years after Super Metroid, skipping a whole console generation in the process. And while Fusion was a side-scroller, just like all the Metroid games since then had been, Prime was something entirely different. So different, as a matter of fact, that I didn't even want to play it when it first came out. Yes, I was that grumpy kid who got mad when they changed up the formula of things I enjoyed even the slightest bit. Well, today I fully recognize what a massive ass I had been, because I finally did play Metroid Prime more recently, and holy McFuckballs, it's amazing. And see, that's how I know it's not just nostalgia for me. I played Prime for the first time like a couple years ago. Going from a 2D side-scroller to a 3D first-person shooter seems like an insane risk to take, and yet Retro Studios pulled it off with flying colors. Everything felt so fresh, yet completely spot on for a Metroid game. The music was brilliant, the environments were breathtaking, and the graphics, I mean, can you even believe this is GameCube? It looks absolutely gorgeous. Everything that made a Metroid game was captured so amazingly well in Prime, just in an entirely new format. Just think about how impressive of a feat that is. One of the best ways Prime innovated was actually through your ability to switch to the scan visor and learn about your surroundings. You could scan almost anything around you. Plants, creatures, machinery. It helped build a world so well that you just felt so there. The entire game satisfies the thirst for exploration and adventure that every Metroid fan longs for. The bosses are epic, the space pirates are terrifying, and the power-ups are totally badass. Even the transition to third person when using the morph ball is executed flawlessly. I could go on, but then we'd be here forever, and trust me, damn it, it's one of the best games of all time, and if you haven't played it, you need to get on that. So here we are. My number one pick for the best Metroid game of all time, as you've probably guessed by now, is Super Metroid. This wasn't an easy decision to come to either. It's like asking me to choose between buffalo wings and pepperoni pizza. Honestly, they should both be able to come in first place, but I chose Super Metroid over Prime as my number one solely because it had a bigger impact on me as a gamer. It was the first Metroid game I ever played, it was the third Metroid game ever made, and it was perfection. If Metroid 2 improved upon the first game tenfold, Super Metroid improved upon that 100 times over. The graphics were astounding for their time, the colors and environments were magnificent, and the music and ambiance were so incredibly immersive. Nothing like this existed at this point in gaming. Nothing. It was the first Metroid with a map, the first one where your beams stacked, the first one with more than 8-bit graphics. It introduced the Spazer, the Speed Booster, the Grapple Beam, the Gravity Suit, Power Bomb, Super Missiles, and more. On top of that, Super Metroid's game design is so brilliant that a player is able to fully navigate a literal maze of a planet with only a map and their wits. It's one of the first video games where your increase in power level by the end of the game can be felt so noticeably by the player. It's the first Metroid game where Samus really feels like the unparalleled powerhouse of kick-assery that she's meant to be. Yes, Super Metroid is, in my opinion, the very best Metroid game. I would say the one thing Prime has over Super Metroid is the scanning mechanic, which was an incredibly effective world-building tool. But there are two things Super does better than Prime that secure its spot at number one. The first is Samus's mobility. There was nothing like the feeling of being able to sprint through a long hallway without stopping, obliterating everything in your path with the speed booster, or using the shine spark technique to literally fly. And speaking of flying, the combination of the space jump and screw attack turned Samus into a whirling buzzsaw of destruction that could go wherever she damn well pleased. But I honestly played through the entirety of Metroid Prime, saying to myself, this game could legitimately replace Super Metroid as my favorite. It all came down to one thing. The second thing Super Metroid does better than Prime is the final boss fight. Now, I'm not going to get into that in this video because I've already covered it at length in at least 2 other videos and I don't want to spoil it, so go ahead and click this annotation if you want to check that out. But just believe me when I say it is one of the best boss fights in video game history. Seriously, Super Metroid is like the 3rd greatest game of all time if you want my opinion. It's so fucking good. Hey, thanks for watching this video. I had a ton of fun making it. It was a lot of hard work. I know it was a really long video, but it's been a while since I made a top 10, and Metroid's something that I'm really passionate about, and now that I've finally played every single Metroid game, I was like, hey, let's make a top 10 about it. So, I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you're new here, thank you so much for watching. Please hit that subscribe button. It would mean a lot to me, and stay tuned for more videos like this in the future. Goodbye!